Story 1. I worked at a mental hospital for about 5 years. The scariest patient and incident involved a patient that had just had surgery to remove an object that she swallowed. I'm down the hall when I hear a nurse scream for help. I run to the patient's room, and she had opened up her stapled shut incision and was holding what looked like part of her intestines in her hands. Blood was everywhere. She didn't seem to feel anything though, and just looked like we were interrupting her. I almost fainted from the sight. I quit that job shortly after. Story 2. I have a patient that frequently engages in rectal digging. Along with this rectal digging, a part of his syndrome is an extremely high pain tolerance. During one of my shifts, I hear one of my coworkers screaming at this patient, so I, of course, ran to see what was going on. My patient was naked in his bed, covered in fresh and dried blood. My coworker then explained to me she just caught him with his fist up his asshole right before I walked in. I then had to have him spread open his butt cheeks to see what was actually going on down there, and, in fact, the blood was coming from his rectum. The nurse who was in charge told me to get him in the shower, and when he stood up, about 10 golf ball-sized blood clots fell out of his ass. I was repulsed and yelled for my coworker to come back and look. The nurse then said to continue giving him a shower. My coworker both looked at each other and said fuck that, as we proceeded to call 911. Blood still was dropping at this point, so I had him sit down on a towel until the ambulance came. After a few hours at the ER, they said he had completely scratched out his rectum and made his already existent hemorrhoids gaping wounds. I have been working at this place for going on 8 years and have plenty more stories like this one. I think I'm so desensitized to anything disgusting I could probably eat a turkey sandwich in one hand and clean up bodily fluids with the other. Story 3. I was in a psych ward for depression, and my roommate was terrifying. She was schizophrenic, depressed, and also probably just weird. She punched herself in the face constantly, while whispering to the voices in her head. She also used to sit in the multi-purpose room, TV, games, fridge, etc., on the floor and masturbate, like, a lot. But she never stopped whispering to herself while she did it. I woke up to pee one night, and she was just in her bed, staring blankly at me. She was moved to a long-term facility on my 3rd day there. Story 4. I found borderline patients to be pretty fucking trippy. One girl loved to eat anything off the ground, pica, a psychological disorder characterized by an appetite for substances that are largely non-nutritive. Things like batteries, pens, staples, twigs, you name it. They had to operate on her to take all the shit out, and once that was done, she would take out the stitches herself and stick whatever she found inside her wound. Got so bad they had to put wrist restraints and these pillow mittens on both her hands with a 2-1 supervision suicide watch. Attention-seeking, very manipulative and malingering at 18 years old. I worked at a mental hospital in California. Madonna's stalker was there, ended up escaping. Octomom was admitted and also worked there, and the dude that broke into and robbed LL Cool J's house was in that bitch too. Story 5. Man, there are a lot of scary cases when you work in pediatric mental health, mostly because of the age. I recently had a kiddo come in who has a history of killing animals in the neighborhood, skinning and impaling cats, crushing glass shards into dog food, and leaving it at the park. Some fucked up shit that is definitely indicative of some serious underlying issues. The scary thing is that the parents were basically okay with this behavior until the kid woke his parents up in the middle of the night by plunging a huge knife, more like a meat cleaver, into their mattress directly between them while they were sleeping. He wasn't sleepwalking and seemed perfectly aware of what he was doing. When they asked him what he was doing and why he just did that, he told them he wanted to kill them to see if your insides are like blanks, which was the name of the neighbor's cat that he impaled on a spike fence post a couple weeks prior. Edit. I removed the cat name, some possibly remotely identifying factors just in case. It's a small fucking world. Story 6. My mother is a K-2 special ed teacher and had a little girl I will never forget. Her parents were very, very white trash looking and were in jail for trying to kill each other, so she was a ward of her elderly grandparents. She had behavioral issues and would get violent sometimes. One day her grandmother told my mom she walked in on the girl, she was almost 5, in the unlit living room squatting in the cat's kitty litter. Having just had a bowel movement and now vigorously fingering herself in the front while watching the TV, which was on a channel that had that old blizzard effect you got when there was no signal. My mom had to call the state to have her put in a secure facility. By the time the state came, she had set fire to their house. I often wonder what happened to her. She'd be well into her 20s by now. Story 7. In the 90s, I worked overnight and weekend security at a center for psychiatry that cared for inpatients, outpatients, and even criminally insane awaiting trial. That area of the building was basically a prison. Police would often bring in the arrested for evaluation, and the homeless could even walk in and ask for help. We saw all kinds. I did this job for years, and some nights got very, very busy. Two scary situations really stick out from those times. The first, I was manning the front desk, and a walk-in patient holding a knife walks in screaming, "I want to kill myself." He had cut himself all over his body and was covered in blood. My supervisor quickly rifled through the database and found him. History of violence against staff, AIDS, hepatitis, and more. I was commanded to put him down. I approached him with a chair as a shield. When he wound up to swing the knife at me, I rammed him with the chair until he went down. Then a bunch of staff jumped in, and everybody put one foot on him until he was better subdued and eventually sedated. A doctor was in my face right afterwards yelling, "Did he touch you? Did he cut you?" I wasn't sure until after an examination. The second incident started when two police bring in a tough-looking guy for assessment. This guy is keeping his head down, not saying anything. I lead them to a secure observation room. The arrested and one officer goes in, the other cop returns with me to get our information and to see if he's in our database. Suddenly my partner, who was watching the monitors, jumps up, hits the alarm and runs back the way we came. We run after, the door is opened, and we see the guy wailing on the officer with his handcuffs like a one-handed flail. The other cop does most of the work in this case, and the arrested is pretty much laid out on the floor. How did this happen? How the fuck did this happen? In my quick inspection, I notice that his hands are funny. They're all covered in blood from the fight, but something isn't right. I look closer. This guy doesn't have a thumb. Even the ball socket that attaches the thumb to the palm has been removed. The cop looks at the other hand. Holy shit. Both thumbs removed. They cuffed this guy and didn't notice he was missing both thumbs. The cuffs would just slide off. I still think about that guy. How? Why? For what reason? What crazy world was he a part of where something like that could happen? I still wonder. Story 8. I met a 5 to 6-year-old girl who was in an inpatient treatment center for trying to smother her newborn brother. She said she wanted him to die because her parents liked him too much. She would go from being a sweet, overly affectionate child to suddenly despising a person and wishing death on them. The hospital wanted to release her after a few days, and the parents refused to take her back that soon. Department of Family Services ended up getting involved. Story 9. I don't work in a mental hospital, but I'm a frequent patient. I was on the ward for about 30 seconds, and they were taking my vitals when an enormous bear of a human being screams "fuck" at the top of his lungs over and over again. He ran down the hallway and got right up in the face of a very petite medtech and was screaming that he owned her eyeballs. One of the patients came and stood between him and the nurse, and it really seemed like he was going to attack her. Finally, they gave him a shot in the ass with Haldol, and he went down. He did the same fucking thing for the next 3 nights until he actually tried choking someone, and they sent him to a more intensive unit. Story 10. I was in an elevator with 2 clients when one of them spoke about how he was Jesus, and the other client took offense because he also claimed to be Jesus, and they had a Jesus fight in the elevator that spilled out into the first floor lobby. They were both claiming that the other could not injure them because they were Jesus. After the hospital security helped me break up the fight, they worked out a deal where they would take turns being Jesus on alternate days. It didn't work out well because they couldn't keep the schedule straight, so one of them announced that he would be Elvis instead, and the problem was solved. Story 11. I worked in the dental clinic of a psychiatric hospital for a bit, and I'll never forget a patient named Terry. Terry loved to wear little girls' clothing and would have pictures of little girls that he had cut out of magazines on a string around his neck. When I first encountered him, I automatically made the assumption that he was some sort of pedophile. I later learned from the dentist I had worked with that Terry had witnessed his little sister being brutally raped and murdered by their stepfather when they were children. He had in a way started to assume the identity of his little sister, and he considered the girls in the pictures he cut out his friends. I felt horrible for jumping to conclusions, especially after I got to know him more and saw what a gentle, kind soul he was. Story 12. In a day treatment facility I volunteered for, I led a writing group to help people develop goals and motivation to continue in treatment. One woman gave really strong and compelling answers about wanting to improve her health, to be a better wife and mother, have the energy to run around and play with her kids, etc. Several weeks after beginning the group, I mention this to another therapist, who informs me this woman has no husband or children, and never has.